Happy Sunday, everyone. Happy Father's Day to all of my fellow fathers out there. You guys are very special. And speaking of special, wasn't planning on doing a video today, but we are going to do so because the tropics are getting busier and a lot of you guys are planning for vacations or already down there and you want to see what's going to happen. And I'm here to kind of help out with that as we kind of break down the tropics and what to kind of look for as far as development. We've got several things on the map that are worth watching but nothing just yet that has scooped up a name. However, we don't necessarily need a name for us to have problems. Just talk to the folks in South Florida last week. They didn't get a named storm, but it certainly felt like it with the amount of rain. So I'm going to spend the majority of the next 15, 20 minutes talking about the tropics. Then we're going to take a quick look at severe weather and some heat across the northern portion of the country here for the upcoming week. Thank you for joining me this morning. Here is a look at our threat for multiple systems that could become depressions or even tropical storms. The first area to watch will be forming here in the next couple of days. So none of these storms has formed just yet. However, with them being so close to land, it's not going to take a lot of time for that to happen. Once we do see a storm forming, it's going to be impacting land. So welcome to hurricane season, especially in an active tropic season. Back-to-back systems, the first one likely to form in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico towards Tuesday or Wednesday morning. That will already be impacting Texas before it even forms with moisture. Some of that moisture heads into Louisiana as well. And we may see, if we do have a named storm, it's probably aiming for northeastern Mexico and maybe deep south Texas by Thursday of next week. That is going to follow with a second system starting next weekend into the following week of the 24th. The track on that and the formation chance isn't as high just yet, but there are signs that there will be yet another system that forms in kind of the same spot, and that generally is going to head up into Texas, maybe Louisiana as well. Now, what we haven't talked much about, because it looks like models are starting to finally pick up on the threat, is that we may see a piece of a front and a trough kind of spin up its own low pressure system here in a few days. And that is going to move pretty quickly underneath a high pressure area towards northern Florida, southern Georgia, and maybe South Carolina, with impacts potentially Thursday and Friday of next week. That one not to be as concerned with when it comes to heavy rain because it's moving a lot quicker than what we're dealing with in the Gulf, but something we still need to watch. And then areas of Central America and southern Mexico are likely going to be dealing with some prolific amounts of rain on the order of 40 plus inches, leading to historic flooding. And that obviously is of concern as well. I'm going to take a look at that and the Caribbean here in the coming days. I was hoping we'd have an updated, there we go, updated outlook showing we have a medium chance, 60% of a storm forming in the southwestern Gulf. Tropical depression at this point, maybe a tropical storm. Regardless of what happens, we're looking at several days of extremely heavy rainfall over portions of southern Mexico and Central America, likely to put lives at stake. So no matter what forms or doesn't form or when it forms or how strong it gets, it's not going to matter when it comes to the rain. This is one of those hurricane seasons that is starting off very wet across the Gulf and especially Central America and the Western Caribbean and the Pacific side of Mexico as well. And I think we're going to see, I hate to forecast things like this, but I think we're going to see a lot of destruction here in the next month, just from flooding alone, not even from wind or surge. So that is something that I'm watching for you guys. Another area is expected to form towards Tuesday, Wednesday, early Thursday, just to the east of the Bahamas, and that is likely going to move west-northwestward with the development potential being up to 30%. Somewhere in this yellow area, we could see development. I'm not quite so sure that South Florida is going to see it, but I guess there's some chance for that. I think it's more likely for the northern half of Florida, but either way, we are going to see yet some more moisture moving into the southeast from this system. On the Pacific side, we do have the southern end of this feature, this big gyre. It's a big circulation, actually goes this direction, where right now we've got about a 20% chance for a weak low pressure system to develop into something like a depression. And that may or may not happen because it's pretty close to land and running out of room, but it is going to produce some incredible amounts of rainfall. So let's take a look at the tropics. I'm going to break everything down for you guys, kind of show you where our features are, and I'm going to start to circle stuff here in pink as well for everybody to see at home. And I apologize, my recording software is not the best in the world, but it does the job. But what you can see is a big gyre right here, this massive circulation, mostly on the Pacific side of Central America, but it is expected to kind of lift northward here into a more favorable spot to see some development in here. And you can start to see with that moisture feed a little bit more action here into the northern Gulf, which we haven't seen yet over the last few days. But for the most part, most of our thunderstorm activity is on the Pacific side of Central America. But as we get into next week, that generally speaking is going to lift more off to the north and west. We do have flare-ups in the Western Caribbean to keep an eye on. Probably nothing at this point other than heavy rainfall. And then you can see the monsoon trough coming off of Africa has become a little bit more active, but it is pretty far south. For us to really be concerned with storms for the Caribbean, we need to see things a little bit farther north and here. And right now, the conditions are not super favorable for that. We do have a cold front and a trough here extending down through South Florida and near Bermuda. And on the southern end of it, a little bit more concentration of showers and storms. This is the area to watch here in a few days. And I'm going to bring this back up for you guys so that we can look a little bit closer in just a couple minutes. Here's a look at the Gulf of Mexico. And I think what you should be seeing the attention drawn to is the northern Gulf Coast here, where we have not really had much rain over the last few days. We've had a big area of high pressure and some sinking air. Now we're starting to see that rising air leading to more shower and storm activity. A few storms have already fired up in the middle of the night and early this morning in coastal Mississippi. We're going to start seeing that as well around the Big Bend area of Florida and across southern Louisiana. So moisture is increasing today. We're kind of now in that transition today where we go from just super hot, kind of sinking air now into a more moist pattern where we start to have more rising air, more shower, thunderstorm activity. There's nothing of great concern just yet for development, but over the next few days, we are going to see that shifting as this giant gyre here begins to head more in a northerly direction, leading to more concentrated activity in the Western Gulf. So I would say give it about a couple of days, and then we're going to start to see that come to life here. Taking a look here at the rest of the Caribbean region, you can see the Eastern Caribbean remains pretty quiet for the time being. Not a lot of organized shower thunderstorm activity. We've got kind of a high pressure region in place here, keeping things relatively quiet, relatively hot. We do have some scattered activity, but nothing super organized at this point. The front is up in here, and that's the area we're going to be watching in a couple of days. We do have some shower and storm activity, though, across the Western Caribbean, where waters are super warm right now. Nothing that looks favorable for development at this time. But if something does form in the Western Gulf, we're going to have a feed out of the southwest that will go over warmer water and produce some heavier showers and storms over the coming week. Here's a look at the Atlantic Ocean. Our system that crossed Florida last week just had way too much wind shear to develop. It's already off in this direction, heading towards Newfoundland. But the boundary that's with it extends into some pretty warm water in here. And models have all indicated since about yesterday morning that there's going to be a piece of this trough that breaks off somewhere in here. And eventually, with our high pressure region that builds into this area, we're going to have a flow around it that drives this system kind of more westerly in the general direction of the east coast of Florida. Now, where it comes in and how intense it gets, still way too soon to say. Welcome to hurricane season, where we get less than 2 days to forecast a landfall. And that's just the nature of the business here with storms this time of the year. As meteorologists, I feel like we shouldn't ignore them just because they haven't formed yet, because they are likely to form. But know that the uncertainty level is higher than I think a lot of us are comfortable with. And there's just nothing we can really do about that other than continue to watch trends and see what pops up and kind of go with what the models are going with. Just kind of go with our guts here. Central Atlantic in pretty good shape. You can see pretty strong flow out of the southwest aloft. That is wind shear that is going to effectively kill anything that comes down through here. It'll be wet, but it isn't going to be anything to be overly concerned with at this point compared to what we're seeing in Central America. And then looking relatively quiet here with waves coming off of Africa still. We still got a few more weeks before we have any major concern. On the Pacific side, we are watching the gyre. We're seeing all kinds of development of showers and storms, but nothing that is really concentrated at anything. The area to kind of watch is in here, close to land. Generally speaking, with our gyre right in here, we've got around that kind of this counterclockwise flow, or clockwise flow, I should say. And that is going to shift northward and take these showers and storms and basically batter the Pacific coastline here of southern Mexico, of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica with incredible amounts of rain. We're going to be dealing with a lot of this in the next couple of weeks with really just relentless amounts of rain. Here's a look at the upper level chart. This is the GFS model from this morning. And as we head into next week, what you'll see is, and this is tough to do, I apologize, region of high pressure in place over the southeast. And then aloft, we've got kind of upper level low feature here. Way up, it's actually high pressure, but lower level, it's more of a low pressure system. We call it a gyre. And you can kind of see where it's circulating right here over southern Mexico. Over time, that area is going to shift northward, as I'll show you guys here. You can kind of see it starting to bump northward here into the Western Gulf. At the same time, this high over the southeast is going to build northward, and underneath the ridge, we do have kind of a more favorable spot for something to form. So we have this big high right here over the mid-Atlantic states. This is Tuesday. Big trough here over the central Atlantic. And underneath the high in areas where the water is warm, we're expecting to see a low pressure trough kind of break off and split. And as that generally heads westward, it's going to be a little bit more favorable to see storm development. So we're going to have kind of two low pressure systems underneath our big ridge right in here, both of them generally moving westward or northwestward. The one in the Gulf kind of more northwestward, and the one in the Southwest Atlantic kind of more westward. And over time, we are going to see this kind of generally moving in the direction of land. And we're not done with that. After this high pressure system kind of breaks down in the northeast over the weekend, we are going to see some rebuilding here. We've got another low pressure area next week to keep an eye on in the Western Gulf. Doesn't look like it's heading to Florida, though, because we do have this ridge in place near Florida. I know a few days ago, models were showing something trying to hit the Panhandle or even the West Coast. That's not going to be the case unless this changes significantly, and I don't think it will. But after this trough leaves the northeast, as we get later into the following week, we are going to see high pressure building right back in at the end of the month of June, meaning it gets hot again here in the Midwest and Northeast. And again, meaning development in the Western Gulf or the Caribbean is going to start to look a little bit more likely again. So multiple windows for things to get going. The European model says pretty decent chance here that we have a depression forming on the in the Southwest Gulf by the time we get to Tuesday or Wednesday. And then chances building near the Bahamas here on Wednesday into Thursday. So you can see here the likelihood of something forming into a tropical depression about 40%, but that chance has climbed. And I expect it probably will continue to do so. Very likely we see at least a tropical depression in the Western Gulf here. And then as we head into next week, we see chances growing up here towards the Texas coast, meaning maybe a second system. If I do this day by day, by the way, you guys will be able to see this a little bit better. As this is Tuesday and a pretty high chance of something forming in the Western Gulf. Here's Wednesday. High chance here, medium-ish chance near the Bahamas. Here's Thursday. Still a good chance for something in northeast Mexico, maybe creeping up to South Texas. Decent chance of something here off the east coast of Florida on Thursday. Here's Friday, and whatever's out here is going to be inland and no longer tropical depression strength. But we may have something in northern Florida still on Friday. Here's the next area to watch Friday and Saturday. And again, we have potentially a second system following right behind the first. Our chances are lower because it's a week out, but this will probably climb. So that's what we'll be watching at this point. And then here we go next Sunday, a week from today, Monday and Tuesday. And notice how if there is something in the Western Gulf, generally speaking, the model says that rather than going inland, it's actually got a chance of coming up the coast, maybe into this general direction here. Probably Texas, but potentially Louisiana as well. So that's what the European shows us. Here's a look at individual ensemble members, just to give you guys a handle on where our low pressures are. And here we go. This is Monday night, and now Tuesday morning, probably dealing with low pressure starting to form somewhere here in the Bay of Campeche, Tuesday morning. This is Tuesday afternoon, and every ensemble shows low pressure, potentially tropical storm strength, but at least depression strength. We also start to see low pressure potentially forming here east of the Bahamas here by the time we get to Tuesday evening. This is Wednesday morning, and then this is Wednesday afternoon. And you can see generally a bend towards the west, towards northeastern Mexico. And then over here, we've got a system that may be close to the Bahamas or just north of the Bahamas. That's going to be kind of the $50,000 question. Does this try to form over the Bahamas or does it stay off to the north? The difference will be for Florida more than anybody else. Here's a look at Thursday evening. This system is already inland and weakening. This system is maybe taking aim at South Florida or potentially still east of Florida or even east of Georgia. And then this is Friday morning. And again, the pressures aren't super low on this, but we've got a massive high to the north. So this may be a system that tries to scoop up a tropical storm name, but the pressure ends up very high on it, over 1,000 millibars. And the difference in the pressure is big enough to create tropical storm conditions on the north side of it. But we're going to have to watch it here. There are, as you can see with the European, some model solutions that take it across Florida into the northeastern Gulf, maybe even towards Louisiana. And then there's some models that take it up into northeast Florida, southern Georgia, maybe even South Carolina. The average of the models says St. Augustine up to about Jacksonville Beach would be the place, but there is a lot of spread because, again, it hasn't formed just yet. And then as we get to next weekend, quieting down on the East Coast, quiet in the Eastern Gulf, but here's our next system that may get generated here next Sunday in about a week or so. And you can see it's following in the footsteps of the first system, but a few more solutions trending up to the upper Texas coast and maybe even potentially Louisiana. So a little bit more of a chance to see something a little farther north and east in the Gulf. So potentially 3 systems between now and next Monday that we have to keep an eye on. Here's the European model real quick. And I thought I had today's loaded, but I guess I didn't. Sorry about that. But you can see here the moisture building in the Gulf of Mexico, then a weak low pressure system here tomorrow night or Tuesday morning. And then that generally heads towards northeastern Mexico by Thursday morning. Here's the next area to watch here near the Bahamas here Wednesday and then Thursday morning. And it may try to circulate into low pressure and hit central or northern Florida, possibly southern Georgia here Thursday night and early Friday morning. The European isn't as strong as the GFS, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. But you can see another low pressure system pops up here in the Southwest Gulf a week from today. And because we've got a trough kind of moving into the northwestern part of Mexico and onto the west coast, the steering flow on this, rather than going west with this high weakening and lifting out, may actually turn it more to the north or even to the northeast the following week. So anywhere in the Western Gulf, we need to watch that second system. But until it forms, I just don't know for sure what's going to exactly happen. Canadian model here, real quick. Again, I thought I had these loaded, but I guess not. That's all right. I'm going to walk you through everything. Moistening up in the Gulf here, low pressure forming here tomorrow night or Tuesday morning. Canadian a little bit more aggressive on this, kind of pinwheels it around a little bit, and then has landfall a little bit farther north, close to Matamoros and right near the U.S.-Mexican border. Early in the day on Thursday, this would be a tropical storm, if that's correct. The Canadian also develops our low pressure system here, but remember the Euro was down here. So the Euro kind of took it in this general direction. The Canadian's already off to the northeast by over 100 miles, which would mean maybe potentially more of a rain threat for South Carolina and Georgia. You can kind of see that right here. So the Canadian not as strong with our high, a little bit farther north, meaning a little bit more of a window farther north, which would be better news for South Florida, which needs to see a dry period. And then you can see the Canadian has our next low pressure by next weekend, moving through the Western Gulf and bringing this one up into the coastal bend of Texas on Monday, the 24th. And finally, we're going to look at the GFS. I did look at this one, and it's kind of in line with the other models here, but the GFS also struggling to kind of pin down where our low pressure is going to form in the Gulf here on Tuesday. Remember, the other models were down in here. The GFS has kind of multiple centers here, one here, and one here. And because it struggles with that, it doesn't exactly know where to pick up on the development area. So the GFS here says the northern system is a little bit more dominant, and we end up with landfall that looks like it should be in North Texas or South Texas, but instead shifts back to this low down here. So again, very messy setup here. Nothing very easy for a meteorologist to really gather until this low forms. And if you have multiple circulations and they all compete with each other, you end up with a weak system. If you have a better defined circulation, then the air is going to want to flow into the center of that, and we get a strengthening system. Both are possible at this point still. Here's a look at our low pressure north and east of the Bahamas, and the GFS takes it very much to the state line of Georgia and Florida here, with most of our rain probably just north of that across southern Georgia, and then takes that low Friday into Alabama and weakens it significantly. But here's our next system. Notice how couple days ago, the GFS said it was going to form down in here and move in this direction. It's killed that idea off completely and follows in the footsteps here. And a week from today, we probably have something again in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico over very warm water. And then maybe a threat to South Texas and Northeast Mexico again. Look at this moisture, by the way, just continuing to feed all the way up into Louisiana and Mississippi into the Delta region here before we dry out a little bit after that. By the way, the GFS is up to some more tricks and tries to form something else down here early in July. Stay tuned on that. We still have a lot of time to watch. Wind gusts, according to the GFS model, are going to pick up here in the western Gulf of Mexico. It is going to get windy as this moisture builds northward. We are seeing gusts that may get up to 40 miles per hour along the Texas and Louisiana coastline, maybe 50 out over the water. And most of that is going to be on Wednesday, and then things kind of settle down. Here's a look at the GFS getting kind of frisky with the system here north of the Bahamas on Wednesday night. Here's Thursday morning. And again, not a big wind maker, but there may be an area of some locally strong wind up to 40 miles per hour. The GFS says it's north of our center, which may go into northeast Florida, but the wind is north of that up into Beaufort County, Glenn County, Chatham County in Georgia. But gust potential is about 40 miles per hour. And then inland, we'll have to see. If it's strengthening when it hits, we may have some gusty winds all the way into South Georgia, maybe even eastern Alabama after that. But again, just one model at this point. Lots can still change. I think the bigger story is rain. And here's the European, and look at how wet things are going to get here around Central America and then into the Western Gulf and into the Northwestern Caribbean. By Tuesday, we are looking at 18 inches of rain across El Salvador, Guatemala, and southern Mexico. That is going to be life-threatening rain. When you get to Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola, those amounts come down significantly, only to just a couple of inches. So you can kind of see where the fire hose is pointed. Two areas. We're looking at this major lashing of rain with all this moisture going up into higher elevations from the southwest. And then circulating around that, we've got an area of heavy rain that's going to be aimed well north of whatever forms into South Texas, maybe even into Houston, Galveston, and into Louisiana as well. What you don't see as a big rainmaker for Florida, even though we've got this low that may head in this direction, and there will be rain with it, it's moving quickly, so we're not talking about anything like what we're seeing down in here. But the European over the next 10 days says there's a potential for 42 inches of rain on the Pacific side of Central America, and the potential for over a foot of rain here in Texas and northeastern Mexico. But the rest of the southeast, fortunately, doesn't look like it's going to see that kind of rain. The GFS is even worse. If we go through the next 10 days, that's about 240 hours. We have chart-topping rainfall. The pink gets to 20 inches. We have 52 inches showing up on the Gulf or on the Pacific coast here, but a heavy amount as well on the Gulf Coast near the Galveston, Houston area, all the way over to Beaumont, Port Arthur, and into southwest Louisiana, potentially 20 inches or more of rain. So lots of rain coming here. The Eastern Caribbean, not really going to see it. The Bahamas aren't really going to see it. And if the GFS is right, Florida has a drier week next week, but still, it's the tropics, and all it takes is one thunderstorm to dump an incredible amount of rain. This is an average of all the models, and as we take this out in time, you'll see kind of what our model average is. A pretty typical week across Florida. We don't see anything extreme at this point. But when you get back to Mississippi and Louisiana, we see totals that are above 6 inches, and then into Texas even more. Taking a look here at Texas, you can see with not just one, but maybe two potential systems, the next 10 days gets extremely wet, with model guidance averaging close to 15 inches around Freeport, 13 inches around Galveston, closer to 10 inches around Houston, 8 to 9 around Lake Charles, 6 or 7 around Lafayette, 8 or 9 around New Iberia, 9 or 10 for Houma, Thibodeau, 6 inches around New Orleans, Baton Rouge, all the way up into coastal Mississippi, where 6 inches is possible. So this is an average of everything. The range is massive, but the average is high enough. So we definitely need to be concerned with that. I'll show you guys real quick some zoomed in values here, and this is over the next 10 days what all the models average out to. 11 inches in Houston, 14 in Lake Jackson, 10 in Corpus Christi. Houston doesn't really need the rain, but some of these areas in South Texas do, so that will help you guys out a little bit, but it is going to get excessive. Farther south, 9 to 10 inches around Brownsville, McAllen, Harlingen, about 10 inches of rain. Laredo, close to 5, and San Antonio, closer to 4 inches. The triangle here has 4 to 6 inches in the forecast, Austin showing 7. Here's Louisiana again, and you can see it's getting wet here today and tomorrow, but we continue to have surges of moisture right through next week. So it looks quite wet across at least the southern half of Louisiana and far southern Mississippi. Looking farther east into Alabama, let me back this up. Sorry, guys. You can see it's already getting wet on the Gulf Coast here through Thursday. And then with the GFS bringing moisture in from this Atlantic system, we may have an increase in moisture over the second part of this week into the weekend across Alabama, western Georgia. And then additional moisture comes in next week. And it doesn't look super wet here, but here's the challenge in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. It's either going to be bone dry and hot, or we're going to have tropical downpours. There's no in between at this point. It's one or the other, and that switch looks like it gets flipped here towards the end of next week. Here's a look at Florida. The Gulf Coast is going to see more rain than the East Coast. Even if a tropical system comes up here, we may have some heavy rain in Northeast Florida. If that system comes farther down, then it's wetter on the Treasure Coast and Space Coast. If it comes farther up, then it's kind of dry down here and wetter on the First Coast and up in the Southeast Georgia. Again, we've got some time before we watch that. We may see some of this moisture creeping up into the low country region of Georgia and South Carolina. Time frame on that is going to be later Thursday into early Friday. If you average the models, you get about an inch in Savannah, but maybe a couple of inches around Hilton Head. Here's a look at our U.S. map, because we do have some severe weather potential again today. Rough weather yesterday in northeastern Nebraska. That has fortunately moved away now with our trough, but you can see another big one getting ready to move into the northwest. We're going to see active weather up in here. We're going to have heat in here that builds north and east. And relatively speaking, still a pretty ample pattern that can produce some severe weather over the next few weeks. Heat in the southwest continues today. Winter weather in the northwest in the higher elevations for one last storm here. And we are going to see more reds here in the coming days. Let me update this for you guys. There we go. Excessive heat watches, meaning next week it's going to get a lot hotter here across the Great Lakes region as well as the interior northeast. Today looks good. It starts getting hotter tomorrow. Then next week the heat is on. And then we see freeze watches across the west. So pretty extreme here at the very end of spring to see cold in the west and heat in the east, but we are still in that kind of a pattern. Severe weather expected again from Wyoming and Nebraska all the way into Wisconsin and Minnesota, especially later tonight. A chance for tornadoes across parts of the upper Mississippi Valley, a chance for severe wind here as well, and a chance for some big hail. I don't think we see as many tornadoes as what we saw last night, but we may see a few. Tomorrow, again, same areas under the gun. Actually, it lifts a little bit farther northward. And then severe weather extends eastward on Tuesday. By the way, if you are watching from southeastern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba and even southwestern Ontario, or northwestern Ontario, southwestern, northwestern, I guess this is southwest, you do have severe weather potential here this week. Here's a look at the heat in the west. Notice how it is dropping off considerably. We're still getting close to 100 in Denver through tomorrow and then dropping considerably, while we have the potential to not get out of the 40s in western Montana, 30s in the mountains, by the way, for Monday and Tuesday. Then it heats back up in the west, and after a chilly Father's Day in the northwest, we should be back to above average by the end of next week. Take a look at Phoenix and Vegas, back over 110 by Friday and Saturday of next week. Central U.S. is hot. You can see today we are going to push 90 degrees in the Twin Cities, close to 100 here in western Nebraska. And that heat does start to build northward a little bit here, but it's only going to get to a certain point. But there is a potential for a record high somewhere up here around Sault Ste. Marie. I'm sorry these graphics make it really tough to follow, but kind of a dumpster fire of a color scheme here, Weather Bell. You guys need to fix that. But you can see where the heat is concentrated. Chicago on south and eastward here Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week. Record heat potentially in Louisville on Friday up to 98. The Gulf Coast is humid, but not nearly as hot as it has been due to the cloud cover and that persistent Gulf moisture moving onshore. And finally in the east, and I will zoom in on the northeast, we start seeing heat building very quickly northeast. A great day in the northeast today. Tomorrow, not bad in New England, but getting hot in upstate New York and Pennsylvania. Record heat in Michigan, Ohio, Eastern Kentucky, and West Virginia here for several days next week. as we look at some mid and maybe upper 90s across this area. Maybe triple digits away from the coastline in southern and central New England on Wednesday and Thursday. And unfortunately, next weekend, it doesn't cool off enough here in Ohio, West Virginia, or Pennsylvania, or in the DMV area. We're still well into the mid and upper 90s, and the humidity climbs as well as that tropical moisture gets sent in our direction. A closer look at the Northeast shows beautiful weather today. Enjoy it while you can. Tomorrow starts to turn hot. And then take a look at Tuesday. We're 90s all the way up into southeastern Quebec. Very hot here. New Brunswick, we are going to see high temperatures in Celsius all the way up to about 34, 35 degrees away from the water. 100 degrees Fahrenheit, southern New Hampshire. Mid to upper 90s here around New York City. Upper 90s in Albany. Upper 90s in Pittsburgh, Wheeling, Parkersburg, and even Clarksburg and Morgantown, West Virginia, and the Eastern Panhandle. Same for Thursday, more extreme heat. Friday is still very hot, but we start to cool down closer to the Canadian border as a front does drop down and break up that heat a little bit. And then as we get to next weekend, it's more tolerable here in northern New England, but it's still pretty hot here with maybe our fourth or fifth straight day of record heat in parts of eastern PA into Maryland and northern Virginia, and West Virginia and southwestern PA as well. In the longer term, that heat does break up. You guys will see here, it's not as hot after about the beginning of next week, but it's still above average. As we get into July, though, much of the country looks like it's going to be running hot, except for the Gulf Coast region and the immediate West Coast here. Many places potentially can be 10 to 15 degrees above average the week of July 4th. And I think the worst of that heat is probably centered over the plains and parts of Illinois and Indiana, but we may see pieces of that spreading eastward into the mid-Atlantic region. After that, we really don't see a whole lot of relief. It may get a little wetter on the East Coast, a little more humid, but that will cut the heat down a little bit. But our heat really is concentrated here kind of on the central and interior parts of the Northwest, where we look at 5 to 10 degrees. Sorry, you can't read that. 5 to 10 degrees above the average. And that is the second week of July, and it just gets worse later in July. We could see a significant heat wave over central parts of the country here for much of the month of July. Rainfall, very wet on the Gulf Coast here. That's not going to change much. As we get into July, the drought will probably worsen in this area. You can see where it's hot, we're probably going to be in for a very dry period. We may get some brief drying here in the central Gulf, but that should change as we start to get more into the meat of hurricane season. Take a look at this moisture building on the East Coast. We're in for wetter, more humid weather the second half of July as we head towards the dog days, and a lot of wetness down here in the Caribbean. That eventually finds its way more off to the north and west once we get into the month of August. Here's a closer look at that as well. This is kind of a day-by-day breakdown for you guys here. Again, don't get too carried away with what one specific day shows, but you can see, generally speaking, it's getting a lot wetter. Hope you guys have a wonderful Father's Day, and for everybody else, I really much appreciate your time today. Please like and subscribe this video. Share with your friends as well. Just know that you guys are super important to me. My goal is to educate. I hope every day somebody comes back feeling like they learned something and maybe prepared for something. But I couldn't do it without my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He is my eternal Father, and He is who I celebrate today and every day. It is just wonderful being able to share my faith with you all and share what drives me to do what I do every day. Jesus told His disciples in Matthew 6:32 and 33 that whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Man, it's just powerful knowing that we've got somebody who's got our back at all times, that has been sacrificed and who has risen again so that we can live eternally with our Father in heaven if we so choose to believe that. You've got a choice where you can believe whatever you'd like on this time on earth, but your time on earth is limited. The grand question that everybody struggles with is what happens next. A lot of people want to just face their belief on what they see happening every day in the world, which is broken, not understanding that there is something better waiting for them on the other side. When I made the choice to accept Jesus as my Savior, I realized that I was going to be blessed in so many more ways, and I wasn't necessarily going to see those blessings here during my short time on earth, but eternally in heaven. It's a gamble. We all take the gamble that you roll the dice, and if you choose to accept Jesus, you don't know what's going to happen. You just go out in faith that it will happen because it already has happened. If you don't choose it, then you're really gambling, and you don't know what's going to happen next eternally. So the reason I chose to follow Jesus is because I didn't want to take that gamble and finish on the other side. So sorry for stumbling there at the end. I just, it's there's a lot going on. The tropics are busy. Life is busy. Being a dad is very busy. It's a blessing though. But being able to bless other people is the reason I do this every day. It's to encourage you with the word, and that is the good news that Jesus Christ is our Father in heaven, and that we can live with him eternally. I will talk with you all again tomorrow morning. Hope you have a blessed day. See ya.